Immerse yourself in a world of dreams and allow your mind to journey through time and space. Imagine, with each breath, your body shedding the fatigue of the day and your thoughts gaining clarity and peace. Today, we will open the pages of history that hold the secrets of civilizations whose names have been almost erased from human memory. When we think of Native Americans, our imagination conjures up images of the vast prairies of North America, where nomadic tribes of Apaches, Iroquois, and Sioux fought for survival. We also recall the majestic city-states of the Aztecs and Mayans, which flourished in Central America. However, the history of the indigenous peoples of South America remains in the shadows, like a forgotten chapter in the immense book of human civilization. Despite a common origin from ancient settlers who crossed the Bering Strait and populated two continents, the fates of the Native American peoples of North and South America have diverged, shaping unique cultures and traditions. While North and Central America became the cradle of new states and cultures, South America, with its harsh Andes and narrow coastal valleys, gave rise to civilizations whose stories have almost faded from human memory. We will be discussing the Native Americans of South America, the peoples whose lives were inextricably linked to the mountains and deserts, who built cities of clay and stone, created exquisite fabrics and ceramics, worshipped the spirits of nature, and mastered the inaccessible mountain peaks. The narrative will leave aside the civilizations of the north and center of the continent, focusing on the southern part of this great historical journey, which began long before the rise of the Inca Empire. South America is a land of majestic mountains and boundless deserts, turbulent rivers, and quiet nights under a shimmering starry sky. Millennia ago, it was inhabited by peoples whom few remember today. Their names are almost forgotten, their cities turned to ruins. But if you listen closely, you can hear the wind carrying echoes of their stories. This lecture is not just a tale of ancient civilizations, but an attempt to touch the past, where in every line you can feel the breath of time, where history is intertwined with legends of those who lived long before us. It is a story not only about the famous Incas, but also about those who created giant drawings on the sand of the Nazca Desert and built cities of clay, as if defying eternity. The narrative will begin with the very first people to set foot on South American soil. The reader will follow them through the centuries to see how majestic empires and forgotten kingdoms arose from their daily lives. And when this story comes to an end, may the memory of these peoples become a bridge to your own reflections on the past. Through the veil of bygone eras, muffling the whisper of rains and the relentless passage of time, echoes of the steps of those who inhabited these lands long before us reach us. Their world has vanished into oblivion, but the echo of their existence still resonates in the depths of the earth, in the grandeur of the mountains, and in the breath of the wind. Chapter 1. In the Cradle of Civilizations, the First Settlers. Long before the impregnable citadels of the Incas soared above the Andes, and the mysterious Nazca lines stretched across the vast expanses of the desert, these lands were already inhabited. South America, surrounded by the gentle waters of the seas and the formidable mountain ranges, has always seemed like a secluded world, and yet, even here, in ancient times, the first people set foot. Scientific research indicates that the ancestors of Native Americans migrated from Asia to America approximately 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. Their journey was long and fraught with danger, passing through ice-bound wastelands, harsh plains, and impenetrable forests. Driven by the instinct for survival, they followed herds of animals in search of new territories, unaware that their descendants were destined to create mighty empires and erect mysterious cult structures. These pioneers led a nomadic life, hunting llamas, guanacos, and other representatives of the local fauna. They gathered fruits, roots, and other gifts of nature, generously scattered across this harsh land. In that era, there were no cities, temples, or empires, only the flickering lights of bonfires under the starry sky, scattered along the rivers and on the slopes of the mountains, indicating the presence of humans. Over the millennia, the way of life of these ancient societies underwent transformation. The warming climate and the retreat of glaciers opened up new opportunities for interaction with the environment. Humans began to take the first steps in agriculture, cultivating plants such as maize, the ancestor of modern corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and quinoa. As they mastered agriculture, people built primitive settlements and created ceramic products. Thus, in picturesque valleys and on elevated plateaus, the first communities arose, destined to become the cradle of future civilizations. This was an era when humans began to leave lasting traces behind. The first rituals and beliefs associated with the spirits of the mountains, the sun, and the earth appeared. However, the path to the flourishing of great civilizations was long and thorny. In those early days, cities of clay were not yet built, mysterious geoglyphs did not yet adorn the desert, and majestic stone temples were not yet constructed. Everything was just beginning. In the silence of time, accompanied by the wind and the rustling of leaves, a culture was being born, destined to give rise to the amazing world of the South American Indians. While some tribes led nomadic lives, others began to settle along the Pacific coast and in the foothills of the Andes. In the fertile lands where the ocean provided fish and the earth allowed for the cultivation of maize and potatoes, the first experiments in creating permanent settlements began. In those distant times, when humanity was just beginning its journey, small communities arose in modest settlements where residents worked the land and exchanged the fruits of their labor with neighboring communities. It was during this period that the first seeds of what we today call culture were sown. People began to create objects not only to ensure a survival, but also to decorate their lives, convey their beliefs, and express their fears. They skillfully sculpted figures of animals and people from clay, drew pictures on stones, and left mysterious patterns on the walls of caves, as if trying to capture their inner world for posterity. Perhaps these creators did not suspect that their creations would one day be discovered by archaeologists, that someone millennia later would gaze at these images, trying to unravel what these first inhabitants of South America dreamed of, feared, and believed in. Approximately 10,000 years ago, these small groups began to spread over increasingly vast territories, developing the high mountain regions of the Andes and the coastal deserts. They not only mastered the art of growing maize and potatoes, but also learned to build terraces on the slopes of the mountains to make the most efficient use of every piece of land. These were the first tentative steps towards conquering nature, towards transforming it from a hostile force into a reliable ally. Parallel to the development of agriculture, other significant changes occurred, gradually transforming the face of human society. Humanity entered an era of forming large social associations. Chiefs, spiritual leaders, and protectors appeared on the political stage. The beginnings of a worldview began to take shape, encompassing questions of life and death, as well as unexplored horizons. In the religious beliefs of that time, natural elements became increasingly important. Luminaries, earth, water resources, air currents, and mountain ranges. According to some archaeologists, it was during this period that the foundation was laid for the unique connection between man and the environment, which would later become a distinctive feature of all the great civilizations of the Andean continent. People perceived themselves as an integral part of nature, the spiritual world, believing that their well-being directly depended on a respectful attitude towards the land. These millennia, devoid of written evidence and majestic temple complexes, became a time of laying the foundations of future empires in modest settlements and on mountain slopes. People acquired skills in communal living, construction, faith, and dreams. These pioneers of South America did not leave behind famous names in history. They lived their lives, loved, fought, and died, unaware that their descendants would build a powerful state and their own deeds would eventually be forgotten. However, it was thanks to their efforts that civilizations such as the Paracas, Nazca, Moche, and Inca would later arise in these lands. In the next chapter, we will turn our attention to the first of these mysterious peoples, the Paracas, a civilization that possessed the art of creating unique fabrics and practiced deformation of the human skull, believing that in this way it brought man closer to divine entities. Chapter 2. Paracas, mysterious weavers and possessors of deformed skulls. Continuing our exciting journey through the ancient pages of South American history, let us mentally transport ourselves to the Pacific coast 2,500 years ago, where the vast desert meets the sea. It was here, in the south of modern Peru, that the mysterious Paracas culture flourished, a people whose existence long remained in the shadows of history. Their traces were reliably hidden beneath the sands and the relentless passage of time. Only in the early 20th century did inquisitive archaeologists begin to discover in this area amazing burials, sharply different from all known burials in South America. These finds not only puzzled scientists, but also continued to be a source of debate and mystery to this day. The Paracas were unsurpassed masters of weaving. They created textile products that were striking in their delicacy and colorfulness, luxurious mantles, elegant bedspreads, and skillfully crafted belts, adorned with intricate ornaments and symbolic images. Thanks to the dry desert climate, these fabrics have survived to this day, arousing the admiration of modern researchers. Their weaving technique was so perfect that some details of the patterns are only visible under high magnification. The threads were dyed in rich colors, scarlet, azure, yellow, emerald, using natural dyes, the composition of which is still being studied and evokes genuine surprise. However, the fame of the Paracas culture is not limited to their skillful fabrics. One of the most mysterious and disturbing elements of their legacy is the skulls discovered by archaeologists in large quantities. Hundreds of skeletons with deformed, unnaturally elongated skulls, as if belonging to beings of extraterrestrial origin, astound the imagination. These skulls are distinguished by their high, elongated structure and extended occipital part. However, the key to this mystery lies in earthly customs. The Paracas practiced cranial deformation, the intentional alteration of the shape of the skull. From a very early age, the heads of infants were tightly bound with fabric and wooden boards, which led to deformation and growth of the skull in a given direction. This was not a random experiment or medical procedure, but a deeply rooted tradition, a ritual and integral part of their worldview. For representatives of the Paracas culture, the elongated shape of the skull served as a symbol of high social status, a sign of belonging to the elite, a connection with deities or the spiritual world. It was believed that the more elongated and unusual the shape of the head, the closer the person was to otherworldly forces. Presumably, such deformation served as a distinctive sign of priests, rulers, or other representatives of the upper strata of society. Perhaps they believed that this rite endowed a person with wisdom and spiritual power. Today, we can only speculate about what meanings the Paracas themselves invested in this ritual. Their writing has not survived to this day, and their history was buried under the sands of the desert. However, these skulls have been preserved, silent witnesses of ancient beliefs and rituals, allowing us to touch the mysterious world of this amazing culture. The burials of the deceased among the representatives of the Paracas culture were skillfully organized underground labyrinths. In these dark dwellings, the buried were laid to rest in a sitting position, surrounded by treasures, exquisite jewelry, indispensable tools, skillfully made ceramics, and the remains of meals. These burials were not accidental. On the contrary, each element was filled with deep meaning, Each artifact that accompanied the deceased on their final journey was intended to serve as a faithful companion in the mysterious world of spirits. The Paracas culture flourished for many centuries, managing to adapt to the harsh conditions of the desert. They skillfully used every available resource, expertly catching fish, cultivating plants, and creating magnificent fabrics that amazed the imagination. Their worldview was inextricably linked to nature and the invisible world of spirits, about which they possessed knowledge that surpasses our understanding. However, nothing lasts forever under the moon. At one tragic moment, the Paracas culture disappeared from the face of the earth, leaving behind only riddles and unanswered questions. The reasons for their disappearance are still a matter of debate and speculation. Perhaps they fell victim to bloody wars. Perhaps climate change turned their lands into a lifeless desert. Or perhaps inexorable time simply erased them from human memory. When archaeologists penetrated the Paracas necropolises, they discovered not only amazing fabrics and deformed skulls, but also many other testimonies of their rich and eventful life. Among the burials were found ceramic products, shell jewelry, skillfully carved wooden objects, and animal bones. All these artifacts told the story of a world where man lived in constant interaction with nature and the spirits who, according to their deep belief, permeated all things. The ancient inhabitants of Paracas, facing the harsh conditions of the arid desert, showed remarkable ingenuity in creating complex irrigation systems that allowed them to cultivate the land. They skillfully used the gifts of the Pacific Ocean, catching fish in its cold waters, collecting shellfish, and hunting seabirds. The life of this people was inextricably linked to the rhythms of nature, to the phases of the moon, tides, and the alternation of seasons. They deeply recognized the need for careful treatment of the land, and each of their celebrations, each ritual, was aimed at maintaining a balance between man and the mysterious forces that control the world. According to researchers, the Paracas believed in the existence of life after death. This is evidenced by their funeral rites, indicating careful preparation of the deceased for the transition to another world. The bodies of the dead were wrapped in several layers of fabric, sometimes reaching 10 or more, and amulets. Miniature figurines, everyday objects, and even food were placed between the layers. Often, vessels with drinks and dried fruits were found near the remains, as if the deceased were equipped for a long journey where all these things could be useful. In the vicinity of the Paracas burials, archaeologists found amazing figurines made of wood or clay. Some of them depicted people with elongated skulls. Others depicted animals, birds, or fantastic creatures. It is assumed that these artifacts were associated with Paracas mythology, with legends about the creation of the world and about the gods looking down on people from the heavens. The Paracas culture, distinguished by its unique originality, was at the same time surprisingly vulnerable. For several centuries, this people lived in harmony with the harsh land, creating priceless works of weaving and carefully preserving complex rituals. However, around the 1st century AD, their civilization began to decline. The reasons for this phenomenon are still a matter of debate among historians and archaeologists. It is possible that the Paracas faced military aggression from warlike neighbors. Perhaps they were destroyed by devastating natural disasters or bloody internal strife. Some researchers believe that the Paracas culture was gradually assimilated by the Nazca civilization, the same mysterious people who were destined to leave their famous giant geoglyphs on the surface of the earth. There is strong evidence that elements of Paracas art, customs, and religious beliefs passed on to the Nazca, as if the echo of memory of the first people continued its existence in a new cultural environment. But be that as it may, their settlements became deserted, majestic temples turned into ruins, and sacred rites ceased. Only skillfully made fabrics, hidden under a layer of sand, and deformed skulls, which are silent witnesses of past eras, have survived to this day. When modern researchers reverently unfold ancient burial shrouds, which have retained their bright colors after 2 millennia, there is a feeling of touching the distant past, a world that has disappeared from the face of the earth but continues to live in legends, myths, and dreams. In the next chapter, the reader will travel to an endless desert where another people, possibly inheriting the knowledge of the Paracas, left mysterious lines on the earth, visible only from a bird's eye view. We will talk about the Nazca, the artists of the desert, whose unsolved mysteries still stir the imagination. Chapter 3, Nazca, creators whose brushes were the desert itself. After the decline of the Paracas culture, a new civilization arose on the southern coast of Peru, whose name is now known far beyond the borders of this country. However, this people gained fame not for military victories or untold riches, but for the mystery captured in the legacy they left behind. These were the Nazca, the true artists of the desert, the creators of monumental geoglyphs whose skill still causes heated discussions and genuine admiration. The Nazca civilization began its ascent around the 1st century AD. Their life took place in the difficult conditions of arid valleys and barren foothills, where rare rains became a real blessing. Like their predecessors, the Paracas, they managed to adapt to these harsh lands, creating complex irrigation systems and cultivating maize, sweet potatoes, beans, and cotton. Harmony with nature was an integral part of the Nazca existence. They valued every drop of water, extracted the gifts of the sea, and hunted in the vast desert. However, their immortality in history was predetermined not by craftsmanship or military prowess, but by the unique mark they left on the earth. On a vast plain stretching along the coast between shifting sand dunes and majestic mountain ranges, the Nazca created one of the most mysterious and striking creations in human history, the famous Nazca lines. Thousands of perfectly straight lines, strict geometric figures, and colossal images of animals and plants stretch for tens of kilometers, like a giant canvas spread out under the open sky. The mysterious images of a monkey, hummingbird, spider, lizard, and whale, executed with amazing clarity, still stir the minds of researchers. There are many versions of the origin of these geoglyphs. Some scientists are inclined to an astronomical interpretation, believing that the Nazca lines served as a giant calendar reflecting the movement of celestial bodies. Others suggest that these were ritual paths along which priests walked during solemn ceremonies, appealing to higher powers. There are also hypotheses about a complex system of water channels, about magical rites, and even about extraterrestrial intervention. But, discarding the most daring fantasies, it should be recognized that the Nazca lines are the creation of human hands. The ancient inhabitants of this region painstakingly removed the top layer of dark stones, exposing the light sand hidden beneath them. The unique combination of dry climate and windless weather has allowed these lines to remain virtually untouched for centuries. What message did the people who lived here 2,000 years ago want to convey to posterity? Were they some kind of maps intended for the gods, ritual symbols, or simply a desire to decorate the world around them? In the Nazca era, the lines in the desert were an integral part of a rich and distinctive culture. Ancient masters created amazing ceramics, decorated with vivid images of birds, fish, and mythical creatures. Their vessels are covered with bizarre patterns and symbols reflecting their beliefs and ideas about the world. The Nazca people erected majestic temples and platforms for rituals. Their religious beliefs were closely connected with the forces of nature, water, earth, and sky. They believed that the favor of the gods, the sending of rain, and the fertility of the land depended on their rites. Perhaps the mysterious lines in the desert were a kind of appeal to the gods, a plea for water and protection from adversity. However, as in any ancient civilization, the Nazca culture had its dark sides. Archaeological research has revealed irrefutable evidence that the Nazca culture practiced ritual sacrifices. In ancient burials, human skulls were found bearing traces of violent death, indicating cruel ceremonies involving human sacrifice. It is assumed that these dark rites were performed during periods of drought or other natural disasters when desperate people believed that the gods had turned away from them and tried to appease higher powers. The world of Nazca was extremely vulnerable. Their existence depended entirely on the mercy of the climate and the unpredictable whims of nature. Despite this, their civilization flourished for several centuries, leaving behind a rich legacy in the form of unique works of art, complex beliefs, and mysterious geoglyphs inscribed on the surface of the earth. Next, we will talk about the daily life of the Nazca, about their construction skills and the architecture of settlements, as well as about the tragic fate of this people when inexorable time turned its course. Away from the famous Nazca lines, whose mysterious outlines are forever imprinted in the sands of the desert, the Nazca people led a simple, earthly life. Their dwellings were unpretentious and were built from available materials, reeds, wood, and stone. The settlements were located along rivers and canals, which provided access to vital water, which in the arid climate was worth its weight in gold. In the fertile valleys, they created artificial terraces for agriculture, where they grew corn, beans, pumpkins, and hot chili peppers. The Nazca people had deep knowledge of the use of every piece of land and knew how to preserve the harvest to survive dry periods. The Nazca people left an indelible mark on history as talented artisans. Their ceramic products still evoke admiration among researchers due to the elegance of forms and the richness of the color palette. Unlike neighboring cultures, prone to realistic depictions of reality, Nazca masters preferred abstract images. On their vessels, you can find images of birds with human features, winged animals, as well as bizarre hybrids born of myths and rich imagination. These images were not just decoration, but an integral part of the Nazca worldview, a reflection of their belief that the world is inhabited by spirits and powerful forces that can both help and harm. The drawings applied to ceramics, fabrics, and of course to the surface of the desert represented a kind of language through which the Nazca communicated with the invisible world. Religious rituals played an important role in their lives. They made sacrifices, held solemn ceremonies, offered prayers to the spirits of the mountains and waters, believing that their well-being directly depended on honoring the forces of nature. The temples of Nazca were modest, but filled with deep symbolism. Archaeologists have discovered the remains of ancient sanctuaries and ritual sites where priests probably observed the starry sky, held festivals, and appealed to the gods with prayers for rain. However, despite their high skill and close connection with nature, the Nazca did not escape the fate of many ancient civilizations. Around the 6th century AD, their culture began to gradually fade away. Scientists suggest that this may have been caused by climate change, prolonged droughts, the destruction of irrigation systems, and soil depletion, which ultimately made life in the desert almost impossible. It is possible that internal strife, the struggle for limited resources, as well as the loss of faith in the power of rituals and gods, led to the decline of the Nazca. Residents left their villages, went to mountainous areas, or joined other peoples. The temples stood empty, the fields fell into disrepair, and the paths that once crossed the plains were forgotten. Only the enigmatic lines in the desert remained untouched, like a silent reminder of a people who gazed at the stars and imprinted their dreams on the boundless earth. Today, as airplanes traverse the skies above the Nazca Valley, travelers witness the majestic geoglyphs unseen by their creators. This fact raises a profound question about the purpose of these monumental creations. Were they intended solely for the eyes of the gods? In the next chapter, the narrative shifts north to the lands where the Moche people dwelled amidst picturesque valleys and river arteries. This nation left its mark on history as valiant warriors, wise priests, and unparalleled masters of ceramics. Their clay artifacts, like living witnesses of bygone eras, still tell us about the life, customs, and worldview of this remarkable civilization. Chapter 4 is dedicated to the Moche, masters of ceramics and rituals. Leaving the mysterious Nazca deserts, we journey to the northern regions, where fertile valleys stretch between mountain ranges and the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. It was here, between the 1st and 6th centuries AD, that one of the most mysterious and vibrant civilizations of ancient South America flourished, the Moche. These people, quite different from their southern neighbors, chose a different form of expression. While the Nazca immortalized their ideas in the form of lines and abstract images on the Earth's surface, the Moche turned to clay, creating true works of art. Their ceramics are not merely utilitarian objects, such as vessels and bowls, but rather a chronicle of their existence, capturing wars, religious beliefs, fears, and hopes. The first discoveries of Moche vessels astonished archaeologists. These artifacts depicted scenes of battles, solemn ceremonies, hunting expeditions, lovemaking, and tragic deaths in all their glory. The faces depicted on the vessels were so strikingly realistic that researchers were able to recreate the appearance of the representatives of this ancient people. They saw wrinkles furrowing the faces of venerable elders, the warlike gleam in the eyes of valiant warriors, exquisite earrings, and the mystical tattoos of priests. Moche ceramics shunned idealization. They represented life in all its multifaceted nature, sometimes cruel, sometimes beautiful, filled with turbulent passions and trembling fear of the mighty forces of nature. The Moche proved themselves to be skilled architects, erecting majestic pyramids of unfired brick. The Temple of the Sun and the Temple of the Moon, towering in the Moche Valley, became symbols of their architectural genius. These monumental structures, like guardians, rose above the valley, reminiscent of the former grandeur of rulers and gods. The Temple of the Sun, according to scientists, was the most grandiose structure of its time in South America, built from millions of bricks, each of which was made by hand. Moche life was permeated with rituals and beliefs. They believed in the existence of a spirit world, in powerful gods, dwelling in inaccessible mountains, boundless seas, and celestial expanses. The Moche religion was inextricably linked to natural cycles, life-giving rain, rich harvests, life-giving sun, and the mysterious moon. Blood was often used in ritual ceremonies. Archaeological excavations indicate the performance of ritual sacrifices of captured warriors. The unfortunate prisoners were led to the tops of the pyramids, where their blood was shed as a sacrifice to the gods. These dark scenes are reflected in Moche ceramics. On the vessels, one can see processions of priests, scenes of fierce battles, sacrifices, and festive celebrations. The Moche did not hide from themselves or from posterity that life and death are integral parts of the great cycle. However, behind the stern facade of the Moche hid a people who knew how to appreciate beauty and craftsmanship, exquisite gold jewelry, skillfully woven fabrics, majestic architecture, and unique ceramics testify to the high level of development of crafts and a rich culture. The Moche built canals and irrigation systems, turning arid lands into fertile fields that gave life. The Moche civilization left behind a rich legacy, attesting to their vibrant life, but, like many ancient peoples, it could not resist the inexorable passage of time. Further research will reveal the details of their daily existence, unravel the mysteries of their disappearance, and learn how the memory of this culture has been preserved in artifacts buried in the earth and in skillfully crafted clay products. The world of the Moche was permeated with a complex system of symbols and signs. Every aspect of their life, from the smallest details of ceramics to large-scale ceremonies, was filled with deep meaning. The art of the Mochica was not merely decoration, but an expressive language through which they communicated with deities and honored their ancestors. Their ceramics contained no random elements. Each image was carefully thought out and carried specific information. Some vessels depict priests wearing animal masks, adorned with wings and fangs. These masks embodied the spirits of nature, powerful jaguars, cunning snakes, graceful birds. During ritual ceremonies, people donned these masks, transforming into beings capable of establishing contact with the other world. Other vessels captured scenes of hunting, naval battles, and everyday life, as if the Mochica sought to immortalize their history in clay, lest their descendants forget their existence. Archaeologists have discovered tombs of the upper echelons of society adorned with gold and silver artifacts. One of the most significant finds was the tomb of the so-called Lord of Sipan. This distinguished warrior or priest was buried with immense riches, exquisite gold jewelry, luxurious clothing, formidable weapons, and symbols of power. His remains testify to his greatness and high status, and the tomb itself reflects the deep reverence the Mochica had for their rulers and the great importance they placed on the afterlife. However, even such an advanced and complex civilization could not escape a sad fate. Around the 6th century AD, the Mochica culture began to decline. The reasons for this phenomenon are still debated among scholars. Some researchers believe that climatic changes, causing devastating droughts and floods, irreparably damaged their irrigation systems and undermined economic stability. Others point to possible internal conflicts and wars between different Mochica centers. It is possible that religious crises, the loss of faith in the power of rituals and gods, also played a role in the extinction of this ancient civilization. The people whose hands erected majestic temples, created exquisite vessels, and built irrigation canals gradually faded into oblivion. Their thriving cities turned into lifeless ruins. Temples lost their former splendor, and canals filled with sand and dirt, as if nature itself was erasing the traces of their existence. However, the memory of the Mochica did not disappear without a trace. Their skillfully crafted ceramics, hidden in the bowels of the earth, survived the onslaught of time, like a silent witness to their former glory. Even now, through the mists of centuries, their monumental temples, although considerably ruined, proudly rise above the valleys, reminding us of the greatness of a bygone era. The stories of the Mochica, imprinted in pliable clay, continue to tell of a world where life and death were inextricably linked, like two sides of the same coin, and where art and religion formed a single whole, permeating all aspects of their existence. In the next chapter, the reader will travel to even more northern lands to touch the mysterious cultures of Lambayeque and Sican, whose rulers surrounded themselves with immense treasures of gold and created legends that have survived for millennia. Chapter 5 will reveal the secrets of Lambayeque and Sican, the mysterious rulers of the coast. After the decline of the Mochica culture on the northern coast of Peru, new peoples emerged, inheriting the traditions of their predecessors, but also bringing their own secrets, rituals, and ideas about power. These peoples, known as Lambayeque and Sican, left an indelible mark on the history of the region. The Lambayeque culture, which originated around the 7th to 9th centuries AD, became the foundation for the subsequent Sican civilization. Their possessions stretched along the coast, encompassing fertile valleys and barren deserts. These people possessed deep knowledge of the surrounding world and knew how to conquer nature. They built complex irrigation systems, developed new lands, and transformed arid regions into blooming gardens, demonstrating their ingenuity and hard work. However, the Lambayeque were famous not only for their skill in agriculture, but were also unsurpassed jewelers. Their culture literally shone with gold, as evidenced by numerous archaeological finds. They created amazing jewelry, masks, diadems, necklaces, breastplates, each of which was covered with the finest patterns and inlaid with turquoise and lapis lazuli, testifying to the highest level of craftsmanship and artistic taste. These artifacts carried much more than just a decorative function. In the world of Lambayeque, and later Sican, gold represented divine power and was a conductor of communication with the celestial spheres. Representatives of these cultures erected grandiose burial complexes for rulers and dignitaries, the scale of which is still staggering. Within these tombs, archaeologists have discovered not only the remains of high-ranking individuals, but also countless offerings, including weapons, ceramic artifacts, and the remains of servants sacrificed to accompany their master on his journey to the afterlife. The Sican culture, originating from the Lambayeque traditions, reached its zenith between the 10th and 12th centuries. The Sican people not only inherited the customs of their predecessors, but also surpassed them in monumentality and scale. They erected majestic pyramids and palaces, created complex irrigation systems, and ensured the prosperity of their civilization through trade and craftsmanship. However, the Sican culture is most renowned for the enigmatic golden mask with crescent-shaped eyes. This symbol became the hallmark of their culture, with its image found on ceramic pieces, jewelry, and even temple walls. Scholars suggest that this mask represented the principal Sican deity associated with the moon, rain, and fertility. Sican religious beliefs were steeped in intricate rituals and ceremonies. They believed that their rulers were intermediaries between the world of humans and the world of gods. Burials often contain sacrificial remains of people and animals, as well as elaborately crafted ritual objects. It was believed that along with the ruler's body, his servants were sent to the spirit world to continue serving him even after death. The Sican world was one where gold and rituals intertwined, where power and fear of the gods defined the life of society. Their society was characterized by a strict hierarchy, with the power of priests and rulers being absolute and unquestionable. However, even such a powerful culture could not avoid the same tragic mistakes as many other civilizations before it. In the following sections, we will examine what happened to the Lambayeque and Sican peoples, what factors led to their decline, and what legacy they left in the sands of time. Despite all their grandeur and might, the Sican culture proved vulnerable to the same forces that have doomed many civilizations before and since. Around the 11th century AD, catastrophic events unfolded on the northern coast of Peru. Climatic changes triggered by a series of powerful El Niño events led to sharp increases in ocean temperatures, resulting in torrential rains, floods, and the destruction of irrigation systems. Lands that had yielded abundant harvests for centuries turned into swamps and barren wastelands. Settlements were destroyed and temples were flooded. The population was forced to abandon their homes, fleeing from hunger and destitution. Amidst the unfolding natural disaster, a profound crisis of faith emerged, causing people to doubt the power of the gods and rulers. Archaeological excavations reveal mass graves, traces of violence and destruction, indicating popular uprisings against the priests. Perhaps fear and famine led to the complete disappearance of this civilization, but the memory of it has been preserved in elements of art, beliefs, and technologies inherited by subsequent cultures. The Chimu culture, which will be the subject of the next chapter, relied heavily on the legacy of Lambayeque and Sican. Archaeological finds, such as gold hidden in the ground, clay vessels depicting lunar eyes, and the ruins of temples and palaces, continue to testify to this remarkable era. They serve as a reminder of the transience of even the most powerful civilizations, whose traces, however, remain in the sands of time. The next chapter will be about the creators of the city made of clay, one of the largest in human history, and a kingdom that lasted until the decline of pre-Columbian South America. Chapter 6 is dedicated to the Chimu, the kingdom of clay palaces. After the decline of the Saipan on the northern coast of Peru, a new power emerged. The Chimu, who succeeded the previous civilizations, built one of the greatest states in the history of pre-Columbian South America. They grew on the ruins of the Saipan, inheriting their knowledge and crafts, and flourished from the 11th to the 15th century until they were conquered by the Incas. Before that moment, the Chimu managed to create something incredible. Chan Chan, the majestic capital of the ancient Chimu civilization, stands before us as a monumental creation entirely built of clay. It is not just a city, but a true labyrinth woven from high walls, spacious squares, luxurious palaces, and modest residential quarters, sprawling across an impressive area of over 20 square kilometers. Millions of unfired bricks, known as adobe, served as the building material for this architectural marvel. From these, majestic walls rose, forming courtyards adorned with exquisite reliefs and intricate ornaments. The city was clearly divided into districts where artisans, members of the nobility, cult servants, and ordinary residents lived, each playing their role in the life of this prosperous center. In the heart of Chan Chan stood the grand palaces of rulers, surrounded by impregnable walls and serene inner gardens. Here, extensive warehouses were filled with food supplies, and ritual sites were dedicated to solemn religious services. Merchants bustling through the streets, warriors clad in armor, important officials, and ordinary citizens created the atmosphere of a lively anthill, pulsating to the rhythm of a great civilization. The Chimu proved to be skilled organizers and administrators. Their state stretched for hundreds of kilometers along the coast, uniting many valleys and diverse peoples. They systematically collected taxes in the form of agricultural products and handicrafts, actively engaged in the construction of irrigation canals and roads, promoting economic and infrastructural development. However, the Chimu were best known for their outstanding craftsmanship. Inheriting a love for gold and silver from their predecessors, they elevated jewelry to unprecedented heights. Their ornaments were exquisite artifacts made of precious metals, skillfully inlaid with turquoise and shells. Archaeological finds, such as necklaces, diadems, breastplates, masks, and goblets, testify that each of these works of art was not only a luxury item, but also a sacred symbol carrying a profound meaning. Chimu culture was permeated with religiosity. They believed in powerful gods representing the forces of nature, the sea, the moon, and the earth. The moon held a special place in their pantheon, being the main goddess. Unlike the dazzling sunlight, its soft glow could be seen at night over their dark cities. The Chimu revered their ancestors, performed complex rituals and sacrifices, striving to maintain harmony between worlds. Unlike their predecessors, the Chimu proved to be true masters of architecture and construction. Their cities were built according to a strict plan, characterized by clear lines of streets and blocks. Palaces were decorated with elegant bas-reliefs depicting fish, birds, waves, and stylized figures, as if the city itself spoke to descendants in the language of symbols. However, behind this external harmony and beauty lay a rigid social structure. Chimu society was strictly divided into castes. The ruler, endowed with the status of a demigod, stood at the head of the hierarchy. The nobility managed lands and resources, priests performed religious rites, and ordinary people toiled in the fields and workshops, built canals and cities, ensuring the luxurious life of the elite. The Chimu state was distinguished by its strength and organization. They steadily expanded their possessions, subjugating neighboring valleys. But, like all great civilizations, the Chimu state faced dangers lurking both from within and without. We will continue the story of the Chimu, their rituals, fall, and how their clay palaces became the last witnesses of one of the most powerful cultures of pre-Columbian South America. Despite their power and grandeur, the Chimu state existed in a fragile balance between nature and power. Their culture, like that of many Andean peoples, believed that everything in the world is interconnected: earth and sky, water and man, power and nature. They worshipped the moon and the sea, considering them sources of life and destiny. Their priests performed ceremonies, appealing to the spirits to ensure fertility, rain, and protection from disasters. But there was also a dark side to Chimu life. Archaeological finds show that they practiced ritual sacrifices. Especially well-known is the tragic find in Huanchaco, where the remains of more than 200 children and llamas were found sacrificed. Scientists believe that this ceremony was held during climate disasters, possibly devastating floods caused by the El Niño phenomenon. Desperate offerings to the gods became the last hope of the Chimu, an attempt to prevent imminent catastrophe and save their state. However, neither the brilliance of precious metals nor bloody rituals could stop the course of history. In the 15th century, a new threat emerged on the political scene: the powerful Inca Empire, whose ambitions extended far beyond the mountain peaks. The Incas, hardened by the harsh climate of the high-altitude plateaus, possessed not only impressive military power, but also outstanding political acumen. They offered the rulers of Chan Chan to recognize their power, but the proud rulers of the clay metropolis rejected this offer, preferring the path of war. A bloody and exhausting confrontation began. The Incas, realizing the complexity and danger of a direct assault on the impregnable Chan Chan, relied on treachery. Instead of an open attack, they cut off vital irrigation canals, depriving the city of water and food sources. In conditions of severe drought and famine, Chan Chan was doomed. In the end, the city fell under the onslaught of the conquerors. The Chimu state was absorbed by the Inca Empire, its rulers stripped of power, and its people scattered throughout the new empire. Talented Chimu artisans continued to create their works of art, but now as subjects of their new masters. Time has not spared the clay walls of Chan Chan, but even after 6 centuries, they retain the imprint of past grandeur. Archaeologists, wandering through the streets and squares of this ghost city, can see elegant bas-reliefs depicting fish and birds, majestic palaces, and the remains of cult structures. Each brick of this city holds the memory of a people who once created the most powerful state on the coast of South America. But the history of the Chimu is not the final point, but only one of the chapters in the multi-layered chronicle of the Andean region. In the next chapter, the narrative will take the reader to even more distant times, to the Wari people, who long before the Incas created the first great empire of South America. Long before the Incas erected impregnable fortresses in Cusco and subdued lands from the Pacific coast to the vast expanses of the Amazon, and before the Chimu culture erected its majestic clay palaces in the highlands of Peru, another, lesser-known but no less significant force arose in the Andes. This is the Wari culture, the first empire in the Andes, whose legacy became the foundation for subsequent civilizations. The Wari culture emerged around the 6th century AD and lasted for about 4 centuries, leaving an indelible mark on the history of the region. Their influence extended far beyond their native lands, encompassing vast territories, from coastal areas to high mountain plateaus, uniting under their rule many peoples and valleys. The Wari sought to create a unified system of governance in South America, establishing trade, introducing centralized administration, and uniting various cultures under the aegis of a single power. The capital of the Wari Empire was the city of the same name, located near modern-day Ayacucho at an altitude of over 2,700 meters above sea level. By the standards of its era, it was a huge metropolis with a population of about 50,000 people, with straight streets, majestic palaces, temples, and residential quarters. The city was surrounded by high and strong walls built of stone and clay, and in the very center were ritual sites and administrative buildings. The Wari pioneered planned urbanization, creating cities according to a clearly developed plan, which allowed them to effectively control the population and resources. They built roads connecting remote regions, constructed warehouses for storing food, and organized the resettlement of peoples, striving to strengthen their influence and expand the borders of the empire. This system, established by the Wari, was subsequently inherited and improved by the Incas. But the Wari were not only talented organizers and builders, but also innovators in many other fields. Skilled masters of their craft, they reached unprecedented heights in pottery, weaving, and metalworking. Their creations amazed the imagination with intricate patterns, strict geometric ornaments, and images of mythical creatures as if descended from the pages of ancient legends. Their ceramic vessels depict the faces of deities clad in formidable masks, as well as scenes of solemn ceremonies and mysterious rites, lifting the veil over their spiritual life. The Wari believed in powerful gods who commanded the elements and controlled the course of the universe. Rain, giving life, the sun, warming the earth, fertile soil, and life itself in all its manifestations. Their pantheon, like a living organism, was inextricably linked to natural cycles, majestic mountains reaching upwards and shimmering stars pointing the way in the darkness. They had deep respect for their ancestors, believing that the ruler was a link between the world of people and higher powers, which made his figure key in their religious system. An important part of their spiritual practice was sacrifice, designed to appease the gods and maintain harmony in the world. People, animals, and valuable objects were sacrificed, and all this took place within the framework of complex ceremonies accompanied by singing, dancing, and rituals conducted on the spacious squares of their cities. Along with spiritual practices, the Wari actively developed agriculture, demonstrating remarkable engineering skills and a deep understanding of the laws of nature. They built terraces on the steep slopes of the mountains, turning unsuitable lands into fertile fields, and created complex irrigation systems that delivered life-giving moisture to the crops. Successes in the agricultural sector allowed them to feed a large population and ensure the stability of the empire. However, despite all its power and developed system of organization, the Wari Empire, like many others before and after it, proved vulnerable to the relentless passage of time. Climate change, internal conflicts, and other factors gradually undermined its foundations. Around the 10th century AD, they began to lose control of their vast territories. Their cities fell into disrepair, and roads became overgrown with grass, as if reminding of the transience of all things. Later, we will examine in detail the reasons for the fall of the Wari Empire, its legacy, and its influence on subsequent civilizations, primarily on the great Inca Empire, which inherited many of its achievements. The Wari Empire grew and strengthened over several centuries, managing to unite under its rule lands inhabited by disparate tribes and small cultures, thereby laying the foundation for future empires. Wari cities were centers of craft production and religious cults, and the roads they built connected coastal areas with high mountain plateaus and secluded valleys. The Wari controlled trade flows, redistributed resources, collected taxes, and perhaps were the first in the history of the Andes to attempt to create a unified cultural space. However, over time, changes occurred that led to decline. Archaeologists studying the history of the Wari tend to see climate change as one of the main reasons for their collapse. Arid periods that gripped the region caused crop failures and famine. The Wari, whose life support system depended on stable agriculture, and effective control over irrigation systems were unprepared for such a test. Another likely cause of the decline was the loss of political control. The vast Wari Empire was based on centralized power and a developed administrative network. When natural disasters undermined the economy, unrest began on the periphery. Subordinate peoples rebelled, and cities in remote regions refused to recognize the authority of the center. Archaeological finds, such as traces of destruction, mass graves, and signs of violence, testify to the upheavals experienced by the empire. In the last decades of its existence, the Wari faced internal conflicts and, possibly, the collapse of the social structure. Gradually, their cities emptied, and administrative centers, where the voices of priests, artisans, and warriors once sounded, plunged into silence. Fields became overgrown with weeds. However, the Wari did not disappear without a trace. Their cultural heritage became the foundation for subsequent Andean civilizations. The Incas, who appeared several centuries later, inherited many elements of their system of government, architecture, and religious practices. Some of the roads built by the Wari were included in the famous network of Inca trails. The administrative model of land division, centralized control, and a system of storing products in granaries became the basis for the largest empire in South America. The memory of the Wari lived on in folk myths and in architectural ruins, which generations later would be excavated by archaeologists. Their cities, ceramics, roads, and terraces became part of the Andean landscape, part of the cultural memory of the peoples of this region. The next chapter will be about those who gathered the legacy of all previous civilizations and created an empire that became the most famous in the history of South America, about the people whose name is known to everyone today, about the great Incas, the rulers of the celestial Andes. When the Paracas, Nazca, Moche, Sican, Chimu, and Wari civilizations passed into history, when their palaces turned into ruins and canals became overgrown with grass, a new people arose in the high mountains of the Andes, a people who gathered the legacy of all forgotten cultures, all vanished kingdoms. They built an empire that became the last great civilization of pre-Columbian South America and the most powerful of all. They were called the Incas. The origin of the Incas is shrouded in legends and traditions. According to myths, they descended from the children of the sun, Manco Capac, and his sister Mama Ocolo, whom the sun god Inti sent to earth to bring order to the world of chaos. Their first task was to find a place where they could found a sacred city. They found this place in a high mountain valley surrounded by mountains, where later the city of Cusco appeared, the heart of the Inca Empire. Historians believe that the Incas began their ascent around the 12th century in the vicinity of Cusco. At first, they were just one of many mountain communities, not particularly outstanding. But over time, they began to expand their influence, subjugate neighboring peoples, conclude alliances, and build their power not only on the strength of weapons, but also on the wisdom of governance. By the 15th century, they had become a powerful empire, Tawantinsuyu, which meant the four parts of the world. Their land stretched from modern Ecuador in the north to Chile and Argentina in the south, from the Pacific Ocean to the eastern slopes of the Andes. It was the largest empire in the history of South America, covering thousands of kilometers and dozens of peoples. The secret of their success lay in a unique system of government. The Incas did not just conquer, they knew how to integrate conquered peoples into their empire. They allowed local residents to preserve their customs and beliefs. The Inca Empire, skillfully integrating conquered lands, implemented a policy of relocating entire communities, scattering them across different corners of its vast territory. This strategic move was aimed at suppressing potential hotbeds of resistance, while simultaneously instilling their own laws, the Quechua language, and a developed infrastructure. A testament to the Incas' engineering genius were their roads, stretching for vast distances and connecting the most remote regions of the empire. These monumental arteries, running through mountain ranges, arid deserts, and fertile valleys, served as vital pathways for the movement of messengers, troop deployments, and the transportation of goods. The Inca road network, rightly considered one of the most outstanding engineering achievements of its era, has been partially preserved to this day, reminding us of the empire's former greatness. The heart of the empire was the majestic city of Cusco, built in the shape of a puma, the sacred animal of the Incas. This political and religious center housed luxurious palaces of rulers, majestic temples, lively markets, and spacious squares. A special place was occupied by the Coricancha Temple, known as the Golden Palace, dedicated to the sun god, Inti. The walls of the temple, covered in shimmering gold, reflected the sun's rays, creating the impression that the sun itself had found its home here. The social structure of the Incas was characterized by a strict hierarchy. At the head stood the Sapa Inca, the sole ruler, possessing unlimited power and considered a direct descendant of the sun god. Below him was the nobility, consisting of influential families, high-ranking officials, military leaders, and skilled artisans. The bulk of the population consisted of peasants and workers who performed military service and were involved in large-scale public works, ensuring the functioning and prosperity of the empire. The economic structure of the Inca Empire was based on the principles of collective labor and fair distribution of material goods. Each member of society was assigned certain responsibilities to the community and the state, which ensured stability and prosperity. The harvested crops were sent to state granaries, from where they were distributed among the population during periods of crop failure or natural disasters, guaranteeing food security. However, the greatness of this civilization lay not only in its economic power and political influence, but also in its special spiritual mood. The Incas deeply believed in the inextricable connection between man and the surrounding nature, worshiping mountains, the sun, the moon, the earth, and water as sacred elements of the universe. Religious rites and festivals dedicated to the sun and the harvest were accompanied by prayers to the spirits of the Apu Mountains and offerings to the Pachamama Earth, reflecting a deep respect for natural forces. Despite their strength, wisdom, and developed culture, the Incas, like many great civilizations of the past, could not avoid the influence of time and historical change. The next chapter will describe in detail the methods of strengthening the empire, the daily life of its inhabitants, as well as the sudden and tragic end of its existence. The Inca Empire, characterized by power and clear organization, was striking in its humanity. It created a state in which each individual was aware of their role and responsibilities, where labor was elevated to the rank of sacred duty, and caring for the well-being of one's neighbor was seen as a moral imperative before the gods and ancestors. The way of life of an ordinary inhabitant of Tawantinsuyu was strictly regulated by the change of seasons and established laws. Men worked in the fields, built terraces for agriculture, laid roads connecting the empire, and irrigation canals, giving life to crops. Women devoted themselves to weaving, housekeeping, and raising the younger generation. Together, side by side, they took part in public works, known as mita, which was seen not as a burden of duty, but as a valuable contribution to the common prosperity. The Incas created one of the most advanced food storage systems unseen in the ancient world. Along the roads, like arteries piercing the empire, and in the cities were located barns and warehouses where stocks of corn, potatoes, dried meat, clothing, and necessary tools were carefully stored. These strategic reserves came to the rescue in times of crop failures, droughts, military conflicts, and natural disasters befalling the land. Thanks to this carefully thought-out system, no resident of the empire had to suffer from hunger. Religion occupied a special place in the spiritual life of the Incas. They believed that the sun itself was their ancestor and powerful protector. Every year in majestic Cusco, the main holiday dedicated to the sun, Inti Raymi, was held. Thousands of people flocked to the main square to pay homage to the divine Inti. The Inca ruler, dressed in glittering golden robes, appeared before his people. The Incas worshipped countless spirits and gods who inhabited their world. They believed in Pachamama, Mother Earth, who gave life and demanded respectful treatment. They worshipped the majestic Apu mountains, considering them living beings protecting people from misfortune. Every stream, every stone, and every tree in their world were animated, possessing their own soul. The Inca peoples were deeply convinced of the existence of an afterlife, which was reflected in carefully designed rituals. They held solemn ceremonies, presented generous gifts, and arranged lavish celebrations in honor of the departed. In their cosmogony, the universe was divided into three separate spheres: Hanan Pacha, the celestial world of gods and shining stars; Kai Pacha, the earthly world inhabited by humans; and Uku Pacha, the mysterious underworld, the abode of ancestors. However, no matter how great and powerful their empire was, no matter how perfect their cities and roads were, the fate of the Incas was tragically predetermined by a clash with an external enemy, for which they were completely unprepared. In 1532, the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro landed on the coast of South America, whose ambitions extended far beyond simply exploring new lands. At that fateful moment, the Inca Empire was engulfed in the flames of a bloody civil war. Two claimants to the throne, Atahualpa and Huascar, were waging a fierce struggle for power, tearing the country apart. This internal struggle not only weakened the empire, but also made it vulnerable to external threats. The Spaniards, like experienced predators, could not miss such an opportunity. They cunningly captured Atahualpa, the legitimate ruler of the Incas, and, despite the huge ransom collected by his subjects in the form of rooms filled to the brim with gold and silver, ruthlessly executed him. This marked the beginning of the tragic end of a great civilization. Within a few years, the Spanish conquistadors defeated the remnants of the Inca army, captured their capital Cusco, and subjugated the vast lands that had been under the rule of the Sapa Inca for centuries. Despite the desperate attempts of the Incas to resist the invaders, hiding in inaccessible mountainous areas and organizing guerrilla raids, their resistance proved futile in the face of superior forces. The once seemingly unshakable Inca Empire collapsed, leaving behind the ruins of majestic cities, destroyed temples, and abandoned roads overgrown with the grass of oblivion. However, the spirit of this ancient people was not broken. The descendants of the Incas still live in the highlands of Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, preserving their identity and traditions. The Quechua language, spoken by their ancestors, still sounds in remote villages and bustling markets, reminding us of a glorious past. The festivals, customs, and belief in the sun and earth, inherited from their ancestors, continue to live in the hearts of people, passed down from generation to generation. The history of the Incas serves as a reminder of how vulnerable even the most powerful civilization can be, and that power and greatness are not eternal. Only memory, culture, songs, and dreams can survive the test of time, preserved for centuries. When we remember the great civilizations of the past, our imagination paints pictures of majestic temples, luxurious palaces, pyramids, mighty warriors, and wise rulers. However, the life of these peoples was not limited to these attributes of greatness. Day after day, millions of ordinary people lived their ordinary lives, filled with everyday worries and joys. They woke up with the first rays of the sun, prepared food, worked in the fields, wove fabrics, raised children, celebrated holidays, and experienced sorrows. Their life, full of ordinary things, was as full of events and emotions as our own. The vast majority of the inhabitants of those times were farmers whose life began with the first rays of the sun, or even earlier. They went to their terraced fields or to the fertile valleys, known as koshai, where they cultivated vital crops: maize, potatoes, beans, peppers, sweet potatoes, and quinoa. These plants formed the foundation of their nutrition and economy, determining the well-being of the community. Along with men, women also took an active part in agricultural work. Everyone understood that the prosperity and future of the entire community depended on their diligence and labor. In mountainous areas, where land was scarce, they performed miracles of ingenuity, creating narrow terraces to make the most of every piece of land. They had a deep knowledge of soil care, skillfully rotated crops, collected rainwater, and directed it through complex canals directly to the fields. Their farming methods were striking in their efficiency and rationality. While men worked in the fields or went hunting, women took care of the home. They skillfully spun threads, wove beautiful fabrics, prepared food, and raised the younger generation. In some regions, women also assisted with construction, livestock care, and the collection of herbs and medicinal plants, showcasing their versatility and indispensability. In daily life, food played a pivotal role, being simple yet nutritious and satisfying. Maize was boiled, baked on embers, or ground into flour, which served as the basis for many dishes. Potatoes were dried, transforming them into chuño, a product capable of being stored for many years, which was especially important in unpredictable climates. Beans and pumpkins served as excellent additions to the diet, enriching it with essential vitamins and micronutrients. In places where the sea was nearby, people consumed fish and shellfish, enjoying the gifts of nature. In high-altitude regions, llamas and alpacas were raised. Their meat was dried and turned into charqui, jerky that could be stored for future use, ensuring a supply of food for a long time. In every settlement, whether a humble village or a bustling town, life pulsed, full of cares and joys. Children, like restless streams, scurried through the streets, engrossed in playing with simple clay figures. In the skilled hands of artisans, shapeless clay transformed into elegant vessels, flexible rods were woven into sturdy baskets, and bizarre ornaments were born from pieces of metal. In workshops, weavers tirelessly worked, creating canvases full of colors and patterns, and jewelers whose creations sparkled with precious stones intended for solemn rites and lively trade in market squares. Men and women lived in simple dwellings built of clay, reeds, or stone, depending on the generosity of nature in their native land. These modest abodes, often consisting of only 1 or 2 rooms, served as a place where the entire life of the family took place on the earthen floor. Here they slept, ate, and shared intimate thoughts. The heart of the house was invariably the hearth, around which they gathered in the evenings to satisfy hunger, exchange news, and listen to mesmerizing legends. However, everyday life was not limited to labor. In every culture, there were sacred festivals, timed to coincide with the changing seasons, abundant harvests, the worship of almighty gods, and the memory of ancestors. On these days, people gathered in spacious squares, held noisy feasts, performed fiery dances, sang praises, and presented generous gifts to the spirits of the earth and sky. From an early age, children absorbed the wisdom of their people. They helped adults in their labors, carefully listened to captivating stories about gods and heroes, about the mysterious spirits inhabiting the mountains and rivers. From infancy, they assimilated invaluable knowledge that was carefully passed down from generation to generation, connecting them with the distant past. The life of the indigenous inhabitants of South America lived in harmony with the environment, was characterized by simplicity and deep meaning. In every action, in every established tradition, there was an inextricable connection with nature and the mysterious world of spirits. People lived in unison with the rhythms of the earth and celestial bodies, rains and droughts, finding their purpose in this cycle. Imagine the opportunity to stroll through the streets of ancient South American Indian settlements, and a world woven from simple but significant details will open up before us. Their dwellings were modest but carefully designed to take local conditions into account. On the coast, houses were built of reeds, clay, and wood, while in mountainous areas, stone was used, skillfully laid without the use of mortar. Surprisingly, such structures withstood devastating earthquakes and resisted the ravages of time. Inside the houses, the furnishings were devoid of excesses. People rested on mats or animal skins, and meals took place directly on the ground around the clay hearth. Along the walls were pitchers of water and food supplies, as well as baskets and woven bags. Inside, there was twilight and coolness, providing salvation from the scorching rays of the sun or the night's coolness. Women wore long dresses and capes made of cotton or alpaca wool, while men wore short tunics and cloaks. The clothing was adorned with intricate patterns, each of which carried a specific meaning, the symbolism of the community, signs of spirits, or images inspired by nature. Wealthy families could afford the luxury of fabrics woven from the finest threads and dyed using bright natural dyes. From a young age, children were dressed in simple clothes and involved in labor, helping their elders. They learned the art of fishing, mastered agriculture, learned to weave cloth and weave baskets. Playful amusements were an integral part of the learning process. Children competed in accuracy, throwing small stones, and demonstrated their dexterity in various competitions. The resounding laughter of children filled the streets of settlements, much like it does today, where echoes of the past intertwine with the present. Market squares were a significant element of daily life. Residents from surrounding villages gathered here to exchange surplus goods, food, textiles, ceramics, shells, and amulets. The market was not just a place for trade, but also a center of social life where news spread and festive events were held. They told fascinating stories, organized dance performances, and shared the latest news about rainfall, harvest, and changes in rulers. In the evenings, after the workday was done, families gathered around the hearth. Elders would tell children stories of times past, of heroes and deities who dwelled on mountain peaks and in the heavens. These tales were passed down orally from one generation to the next, preserving the memory of ancestors, their great deeds, and life lessons. The community played a paramount role in everyone's life. All resources were shared: land, harvested crops, worries, and joys. People supported each other in building homes, harvesting crops, and holding festive celebrations. This collective lifestyle was essential for survival in the harsh conditions of the Andes and coastal desert regions. Despite the absence of writing and books to record daily life, their memory, knowledge, and customs lived vividly in oral traditions, melodious songs, exquisite ceramics, and intricate ornaments. Perhaps this simple, ordinary life was the foundation of their remarkable cultures. Majestic pyramids and cities were built by the hands of those who started work at dawn, appreciated every rain and the fertility of the land, and lived in harmony with the cycles of nature and the passage of time. Only by viewing the world of these peoples not as the deeds of heroes of bygone eras, but as the lives of ordinary people with their daily anxieties and joys, does their history become closer and more understandable to us, for in their destinies we find echoes of our own lives. As the sun set and the shadows of the mountains lengthened over the valleys, fragrant smoke rose. A mystery began, unrecorded in the chronicles of conquerors and rarely reflected in patterns and drawings. This was the world of spirits, dreams, and rituals, hidden from the uninitiated, the world of shamans. Each people of South America had their own guides between the world of humans and gods, between reality and the beyond. They were called by different names: shamans, priests, people of power. Healers. They were the keepers of the secret paths along which spirits traveled and knew how to interpret the signs of nature. They possessed knowledge of medicinal herbs and roots and could predict the future by smoke and shadows. Such customs were an integral part of the existence of Native Americans, on par with cultivating the land and building homes. The belief in the existence of spirits and magic was inextricably linked to their daily lives. Illnesses, poor harvests, death, love experiences, all found explanation in the influence of invisible forces. To establish contact with these forces required chosen people and special rituals. In the evenings, when the flames of the fire illuminated the walls of the dwellings and the wind rustled softly in the reeds, shamans gathered the community around them. Sometimes the rituals were modest and domestic, and sometimes they grew into multi-day ceremonies, attracting residents from surrounding settlements. Among these rituals, a special place was given to the use of plants endowed with exceptional power. Among them were the leaves of tobacco, which in South American cultures was not just a common habit, but a sacred plant. Tobacco was used in the process of smoking to cleanse the mind, establish contact with spirits, and expel evil entities and ailments. Its smoke was considered a link between worlds, conveying prayers and requests to the gods. However, tobacco was just one of many such plants. In the hot forests of the Amazon, in the mountains and valleys, shamans used other plants capable of altering consciousness. In ancient times, intoxicating drinks were used in sacred rituals to open the veil of mystery, to allow one to see invisible worlds, to heed the voices of departed ancestors, to understand the secrets of healing ailments, and to find lost souls. Shamans entering a trance under the influence of ayahuasca and other plants claimed to travel through unknown dimensions. In these worlds, they encountered the spirits of animals and plants, listened to the speeches of divine entities, and confronted terrifying monsters. Their journeys were not always cloudless and joyful. Sometimes they were associated with fear and suffering. Such practices were not only common in the Amazon. On the coasts and in the mountainous regions of the Andes, locals used cacti with psychoactive properties, prepared infusions from seeds and herbs, and inhaled powders that caused hallucinations. All of this was an integral part of ancient magic, a way of communicating with what is hidden from ordinary sight. However, shamanism was not limited to immersion in a trance. It was an entire art, including deep knowledge of medicinal herbs, the ability to heal, predict the future, resolve conflicts, and act as an intermediary between the world of people and the world of spirits. Shamans possessed not only power, but also enormous responsibility. Their opinions were listened to. They were approached for help in difficult times, and they were sought for answers to the most important questions. In the deep darkness of the night, when only the flickering flame of a bonfire illuminates the surroundings, and the air is filled with the tart smells of tobacco and herbs, a mysterious rite takes place. In the very center of the circle sits a shaman whose face is hidden by a veil of shadows. His lips utter ancient chants and whispers, words whose meaning escapes the uninitiated. People gather around him, driven by different motives. Some seek wise advice, others hope for healing, and still others are simply driven by fear of the unknown. The sounds of flutes and drums fill the space, creating a mystical atmosphere. Clouds of tobacco smoke like ghostly snakes rise to the dark sky, mixing with the night air. From time to time, the shaman throws handfuls of herbs into the fire, utters mysterious incantations. His hands make smooth movements as if warding off evil spirits. Sometimes he plunges into deep silence, listening to voices inaccessible to ordinary hearing. In the cultures of the Andes and the Amazon, the belief is rooted that diseases do not arise by chance. They are considered a consequence of the influence of otherworldly forces, evil spells, the evil eye, or a disturbed harmony with nature. Therefore, healing begins not with the use of herbs and ointments, but with a penetrating dialogue with the invisible world. The shaman embarks on a spiritual journey to discover the root of the ailment and return health and well-being to the person. However, this journey is not just a metaphor. To walk these invisible paths, shamans resort to the help of power plants. Along with tobacco and ayahuasca, they use an infusion of San Pedro cacti, powders from Anadendanethera seeds containing powerful hallucinogens, as well as coca leaves, whose chewing helps to cope with fatigue and adapt to the high-altitude climate of the Andes. Ancient rites, shrouded in a veil of magic and mystery, gave a sense of belonging to something grandiose, lying beyond the ordinary. Participants in these ceremonies often experienced a storm of emotions, experienced vivid visions, and felt a powerful physical and mental shock. Immersed in a trance, they returned exhausted but unwavering in their connection with otherworldly forces. However, behind the veil of bonfires, mesmerizing chants, and the whisper of spirits lies a different interpretation, a scientific view of these practices. Modern researchers and doctors who have devoted themselves to studying the phenomenon of shamanic rituals emphasize that the state into which shamans plunge themselves and their followers is, first of all, the strongest intoxication of the body. Psychoactive substances contained in ayahuasca, tobacco, Anadendanethera, and other plants cause deep disturbances in brain biochemistry. They provoke hallucinations, disorientation, distorted perception of time and space. In a state of trance, a person loses the ability to think critically. The boundaries of his self are blurred, and emotions reach extreme intensity. This state can be perceived as enlightenment, but in reality, it is the result of a disruption in the normal functioning of the brain, a chemical imbalance that is subjectively experienced as a mystical experience. Psychiatrists and neurobiologists argue that no spiritual worlds are opened at the same time. Everything that happens is a projection of the inner world of a person, his fantasies, fears, and hopes, enhanced by the effects of psychotropic substances. Such practices are fraught with danger to mental health, provoking anxiety disorders and exacerbating hidden mental problems. Close attention from experts is drawn to the popular fascination with ayahuasca ceremonies in some countries. Many tourists, driven by a thirst for spiritual discoveries, go to these rituals, not realizing that in the process their body is subjected to severe intoxication. Vomiting occurs, the heartbeat quickens, and in some cases, convulsions and hallucinations are observed. From a scientific point of view, this is not a path to enlightenment, but a violent interference in the natural functioning of the brain, accompanied by toxic stress for the body and mind. Of course, for indigenous people, these practices were an integral part of their culture. They lived in a world where the boundaries between reality and mysticism were blurred. However, today, possessing deep knowledge of the workings of the brain and psyche, surpassing the knowledge of ancient priests and shamans, it is important to remember, hallucination is not a revelation, but a sign of a violation of neurochemical process.